Welcome to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today we have a special episode for those bar studiers that just got results from the October 2020 California Bar Exam. Your Bar Exam Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the bar exam experience so you can study effectively, stay sane, and hopefully pass and move on with your life. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app and check out our sister podcast, the Law School Toolbox podcast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on barexamtoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today, we're talking about what to do if you just found out you failed the latest California bar exam and you're trying to decide whether to take February and how to prepare if you do take it. And first off, well, we're not actually exactly sure when this podcast is going to be released. Since nobody really knows when California results are coming out. And frankly, that date might impact some of our advice. But for the sake of argument, based on the best available information right now, which is in essentially mid-December, we think California results are going to come out probably January 8th or the 15th. So you're probably listening to this kind of around there.
Oh my gosh. It's bizarre that we have to have these conversations. I don't think I would have ever said, I don't know if the bar results will be coming out 5 or 6 weeks before the bar. I'm just not sure.
Right. I mean, basically, yeah. So if the February 2021 bar exam is happening on the 23rd and the 24th of February. So if you get results on the 8th, which is a Friday, and you start studying the very next Monday, which is probably not really realistic for most people, that's 7 weeks to be literally the day before the exam. And if it's the 15th that you get your results and you start the next Monday, that's only 6 weeks. So most people aren't even going to be able to turn around and start studying immediately. So this is a super, super tight time frame, however this goes down.
Yeah. And this is not ideal at all, which is
it's definitely
which is
not.
interesting because it's what a juxtaposition to the last bar season, which was the longest bar season ever. And now we have the shortest bar season ever for most folks.
Last one was kind of like the never-ending story.
Groundhog Day.
You just keep just over and over. It's like another month, another month, another month.
I know.
Yeah, this is going to be you do not have a lot of time.
Yeah. And so as you can imagine, it's December and we're talking about this. Our team has been talking about what to do for weeks now because we really want to make sure that folks who do want to sit for February are able to prepare. So, we're hoping this podcast can help you make some quick decisions because the biggest issue is you don't have a lot of time to noodle on what you're going to do. You got to get in and get started to try and get this work done.
Right. And I think the big question for people is, should you try to do this February exam in a rush type of situation, kind of all hands on deck focused, or do you wait until July and set up a more reasonable schedule for yourself? And so there are lots and lots of considerations with that, but I think that's really the big question for most people. And then secondarily, if you do decide to take it in February, obviously, what do you do?
Right. So I guess the first place to start is how we think that people should decide whether or not they're going to study in February. And I think the first thing you have to think about is, how close were you to passing?
Right. I mean, when we had this conversation with our team, about basically what we were going to put together for students, one of our tutors said quite wisely, are we just going to take every single person who wants to study, or are there people that we're going to strongly encourage to wait? And, I think, harsh as it sounds, if you were not pretty close to passing, I think you have to think seriously about waiting.
Yeah, unless you had a special circumstance,
right,
which really pushed down your scores. Coming back from a large gap is always a challenge in the best of circumstances. And this condensed time frame for most people is going to be very challenging, especially if you're someone who, let's say, even gets time and a half. And so, each practice exam is going to just take you longer to complete. So this condensed period is going to seem even more condensed for folks in that situation. And so you really have to be able to think about if you have enough time to put in enough work to make up that delta. And close, I mean, we were debating this on our team, like the cutoff of what close is tricky because it can be very different and you have to kind of holistically look at scores. So what do you think is like a close cutoff?
Well, I mean, given that California reduced their overall cut score, so now we're looking at 1390. I mean, previously when it was 1450, we would have probably said, like 1300s-ish. I mean, I think if I'm not in like the 1300s, I'm probably going to think seriously about spending more time preparing. I think close is like 20 points, 30 points, something like that. If you have a 1350 or above, I would say like you're pretty close to passing. I mean, if you're in the 1200s at this point, I'm just not sure that you have enough time to turn that around. Unless, as you said, like something major happened on the test day or like right before.
Yeah. I'd say 100 points, so like 13, if we're going for 1390 and you've got a 1290, okay.
I mean, that's kind of the outer range of what I might consider.
Yeah. The other thing I think I would look at is, when you get those score reports and you really lay it all out, like, was it like across the board issues, or did you like pass 2 sections and not the third? Is there one section that really needed a lot of focus? Because if there's some across the board considerations in your scores or, over this 90 to 100 point kind of threshold of being quote unquote close, there's some major work that needs to be done. And you need to just make sure that you have time to do that work. And it's going to be tricky. It really is.
Right. I mean, I think that's absolutely correct. I think even within your essay scores and your PT, you can look at, were you doing very, very well on some of them and very poorly on others? Okay, what that says is probably there were some substantive knowledge issues, which are actually easier to correct probably than a situation where your scores are uniformly low, which is suggesting more like big picture writing problems. So if you have those, and this is a situation that's been ongoing since law school, you've always been kind of towards the bottom of the class, you've gotten feedback that, your exams are not really going so well. I think that's a harder question than just like you literally didn't know the law of this one area. Although if you've studied for 6 months, I don't know why that would be, but say for the sake of argument, you didn't, and you blew an essay or two, like that's actually easier to correct.
Yeah. And hey, we've heard all the stories, people puking in the middle of an essay question, technology issues. Like there's so many things that can happen that can push scores down. We have heard a lot of the stories. So you just need to really look at the whole picture. And I think that's when really sitting down with your scores as soon as you get them and trying to evaluate for yourself kind of what went wrong so you can think about how you're going to strategize to study again is going to help inform that decision. Of course, you also have to think about whether or not you can study full time, or if you're working, can you take any time off? Because 5 to 6 weeks full-time study will still be a shortened bar season for most. And then we see so many repeat takers are already working that if you can only study 20 hours a week for 5 weeks, I mean, that's 100 hours of studying, which is like not a lot. That's like 2 work weeks.
That's pretty much like a quarter of what is generally recommended.
Yeah. So again, if you're like 1370, 1380, maybe you could pull that off. But if you have an actual delta to really come back from, I would be concerned if you are studying while working and cannot take any time off, at least a few weeks.
Right. I mean, I think, and a lot of these are kind of balancing tests, really, so like you said, how close are you to passing? If you are 10 points away and you can take a few weeks off, but you have to study after work, like, okay, you can probably do that. But if you're 100 points away, like, and you're working and studying and you're only able to study part-time, like, I'm going to tell you right now, you're not going to pass. Like, don't even bother.
Right.
I mean, that might sound harsh, but that's just like, there's no way that's going to happen. This is not magic.
Yeah. And it's just work in to get output out. I mean, you just need so much time. I was just talking to actually a law student today about cramming for exams. It was kind of the same thing. I was talking about, how they need to be spending their time and how many hours to study and, what is wasted time and what's not. I mean, we're going to get more into some of the nitty gritties, but, this is crunch time. And I think that in a way, this is going to feel like cramming for finals, even if you're studying full time.
Right. And I think it's just that you've got to consider the fatigue factor if you're trying to work and do all this extra work in a compressed period of time. You really got to think about whether this makes sense.
Yeah. I think my thoughts are a little different too, depending on if you're taking the attorney's exam or the full exam. Attorneys don't take the multiple choice portion. And I think that for a lot of people that lightens the study load. The law that is tested, although it crosses over, the essays just don't test some of the nuances that frequently come up on the MBE. And so it does lighten maybe in some ways the detailed substantive review and practice you have to do. So that might free up enough time. I think, if you are an attorney and you think you have the time to study, I think it's a different problem for you because you have a bit less material that you need to prepare for. But again, if you're working a law job at 60 hours a week and you're only going to have 5 weeks to study, that's still going to be tight, even for the attorney's exam, if you're planning on reviewing a lot more law.
Right. And I mean, we're assuming in this case that you've just failed the exam. So there was a reason that you failed the attorney's exam already. So, hopefully if you are an attorney who is planning to study, has never taken it, you've already started.
Yes, one would hope so. So if you're listening to this in January and you haven't started yet, now is a great time to start.
Yeah. Or maybe just plan on postponing.
Yeah.
I think another question people have to really sit with is whether they prepared properly to start with, and so when I said earlier, like, I don't know how you wouldn't have studied certain areas, you had all this time. What were you doing with that time? Like, were you really sitting and studying and like doing everything you could? I mean, did you blow off topics? Like, what happened? It was a weird bar season, but what caused you to be in this situation? I think you really have to figure out.
Yeah, and you've got to be honest with yourself about busy work, because I think that, we spend so much time like studying, and I'm using quotes on the podcast. My fingers are quoting. It's pretty ridiculous.
Air quotes.
As I was doing it, I was air quoting here on the podcast. But, I think that there's so much focus on clocking hours, but there's not as much focus on the importance of what you're doing in those hours. And I do have to blame, I think, the commercial bar programs and this idea that listening to lectures in this very passive way can kind of count as study time, because I think for most people, you're not getting much value out of that. And so when you're thinking about how you studied, what went wrong, what went right, you have to be very honest with yourself. You can't just say like, oh, well, I studied 12 hours a day, so I'm good. If I just do that again, like, I'm sure it'll fix it. Or maybe I'll study 13 hours a day this time. It's just not about the hours you've studied. You have to think about what you did during those hours.
Oh, for sure. And I think like sometimes, obviously, as you said, like random things happen leading up to exam day or on exam day. Did you have like technical problems? Like, there can be kind of excuses for like why some of this happened, but I'm just concerned for people who really like feel like they did study seriously between May and October and then get their scores and they're getting like terrible scores on half the essays because they feel like they don't know the material. Like, something's happened here. And I think, people really have to sit with like, what is it going to take for me to have enough time and energy and like focus and whatever help to learn this particular material in a way that I can use it and pass this exam? And if you can't really answer that question, I'm just not sure how you turn around and study in 5 weeks.
Yeah. You're asking a lot. And there needs to also be an acknowledgement, I think, of the mental space that so many of us have been in during this time too, because more than even a typical bar season, I think you have to think about how you were doing at that time and how you are doing now, and whether or not you have the capacity to really dive into this. I think that collectively we are fatigued. I don't even want to think about what the world looks like in 4 weeks, 3 weeks when somebody's listening to this, like how much more awfulness there might be in another 3 to 4 weeks. And everybody is coping with that differently. And if you are really struggling, or if the realities of this and the stresses of this current world are making it hard for you to study, without judgment, I think you need to acknowledge that for yourself so you can plan around it. There is a lot going on right now.
Right. And people have different demands. I mean, if you're someone who has like kids at home and that kind of thing, that's a very different scenario from someone who's just not working and just found out they didn't pass and they have nothing to do for the next 2 months. And maybe they can sit down and really, block everything out and just do this. I think people have to be very realistic about their commitments.
Yeah.
Because there's just no point in like sitting for an exam that you're not prepared for.
No, because every failure means something, even if you say it won't. I've found that across the board, and I've almost been doing this for like 10 years. Across the board, even if somebody was like, well, I took it as a practice test. I knew I wasn't going to pass. That person never comes to me and says, oh, I passed, or I didn't pass, and I knew I wasn't going to pass. It's no big deal. They're all still upset about it.
Right. It stings.
It stings.
Even if you know why you got that failing result and you expected it, it still stings when you get it because you're still hoping maybe you wouldn't have taken it if you weren't hoping for a different result.
Right. Not to mention the fact that we are all, most of us, type A personalities who don't like negative surprises. Like we don't like to stand on a scale and be like, what do you mean I didn't lose 2 pounds?
Right.
But it's not possible. Any of these, even these tiny failures, right? None of us like any of those, right? Not performing at our best or not having everything organized the way we want to. And so it's like this, you're not going to be able to ignore the failure. So don't sit for it unless you can give it the good old honest college try.
Right. And I think another thing people have to consider really on those lines is, what did your law school experience look like? So, if somebody comes to us and they're like, I've never failed anything before in my life. I graduated from Stanford. Like, I don't know how this happened. It's like, okay, we probably know what happened in your study process. So like we can help you correct that. So, if you're at like a very fancy school, you're doing very well, like that's a different scenario from someone who's consistently struggled in law school and maybe never really got those skills that you need to pass the bar.
Yeah. I mean, it's an unfortunate reality, but previous academic success is typically an indicator of bar exam success. So if you have a history of struggling academically or just specifically on tests for whatever reason, that, you need to be able to really sit and think about whether or not you can scramble, because I think this is going to be a scramble to get ready. And if not, that's okay. Because nobody's going to look back and be like, why didn't you sit for the February exam? And you're like, well, that was February 2021. And everyone's going to be like, oh, yeah.
Like, yeah, we got results like so late that it just wasn't possible for me to study again. So I decided to like prepare for July and then I passed that one.
Right. And everyone's going to be like, oh, 2021. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really weird, huh?
Nobody's going to, I feel like we get a life free pass, 2020 and 2021.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good point. I mean, it's time to kind of reflect on law school and really be honest about your scores. I know that we wish sometimes those score reports had more details in them than they do, but they can still tell you a lot and at least raise questions for you to have to answer for yourself. So look at the first morning session of essays. And I realize that things are a little different on the remote exam because you have these kind of mini breaks and things like that. But fatigue is always something that you can look for. Do you constantly perform poorest on the last essay of a section? Are there certain subjects that you just really bombed? Or like you said earlier, do you have consistency between all of the substantive subjects? Was the PT just a problem?
Right.
Was that, a problem area, or was the MBE just a problem? If it's universally, low, it's probably a mix of substantive and exam taking techniques. And so you can get a lot of information by kind of digging into those questions. These aren't fun conversations to have with yourself, but you just got to do it.
Yeah, I'm curious with a shorter MBE if they're going to break down the subject areas or not. Assuming they do, just for people who want to know how to read that, basically a higher number there is better. So you did better on a section with a higher number, which is very confusing the way they lay it out. But, if it says that you did evidence was 70% and Civ Pro was 20%, you did better in evidence. That's all you need to know, really. Right.
Yeah, that's true. I've been looking at other jurisdiction score reports for the October exam, and they have not done that, but I don't think they ever did that. This is California's own weird.
Well, some states do it and some states don't,
yeah.
But it's unclear, because the shorter one was kind of a weird thing, whether they're going to give you that information or not.
Yeah.
Again, if they do, again, you're basically looking at are there things I'm doing better or worse in, or am I consistently low across the board?
Yeah. Another population we talk to and work with a lot are foreign trained lawyers.
Oh, that's a big one. Yeah.
Yeah. And many of these foreign trained lawyers, English is not their primary or first language. And that is always a challenge. I would never want to take an exam like this in my non-first language. That's we've worked with some very brilliant foreign trained attorneys, and it's just to perform this quickly under these conditions is very, very challenging. And so if you're coming to this and you've never sat for a bar exam before and you think that you want to try and study, you need more time than 5 to 6 weeks, to be honest, because you have so much substantive law to learn. And if you're coming at this after a failure, I think you have to be really honest with yourself about why you didn't pass. Was it a lack of substantive knowledge of the law, which I think can happen frequently because you're just dropped into this jurisdiction. You may have taken an LLM or you may not have, and so you're just not going to have a lot of time to learn a lot of law. It's going to feel very crunched.
Yeah, I think if you're a foreign trained lawyer who found out, who took the last exam and then didn't pass, even more so, should you bother taking February is basically a question of how close were you to passing. And that number needs to be closer than than like a normal JD. Like if you're not fairly close, like say within 40 or 50 points, I honestly wouldn't bother.
Also, many foreign trained lawyers are working.
Oh yeah, of course.
Not licensed working. Yeah, we see most of the foreign trained attorneys that we work with are working. And so if you can't take time off or your work is not going to give you some flexibility to really chip away at this, then I would just hold off until July.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say you need to be very, very close to passing to bother doing it again in February.
Yeah. Well, then of course the issue comes up with if you prepare to tip again, it usually costs quite a bit of money to be able to prepare. Unfortunately, the bar is not cheap. It's not cheap to sit for it. It's not cheap to get help for it. And so you really got to think about whether or not you can invest in whatever resources that you can to get you where you need to be. And again, this comes from asking those difficult questions about, what went wrong so you can try and, fill in the gaps. But it's really okay to just say, February is not my month or my time. I need more time. I need more time to keep working so I can really take some time off. I need to get a new job so I can work for a while. I've had a lot of students find success by just saying, I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to invest in myself. I'm going to set myself up for success so the next time I can really knock it out of the park. And they do.
Yeah. And that's way better than just taking it, failing, spending all that time and energy and money, and then turning around and having to do the same thing you would have done anyway.
Yeah. If you are working for a firm or you're getting pressure from your job to sit for February, then I think you should ask them to help you if you can. If they really want you to pass and they want you to study in a condensed time frame, I think you need to hire somebody to coach you through it and strategize for your individual situation. One of the things that we do is we create personalized study schedules. And if you have a complicated timeline, then you need someone to sit down and help you do that, in my opinion.
Right.
And so if your job is the one pushing you to that, then I think you got to go to your bosses or HR and say, I cannot do this without financial support to get the resources I need to do this abnormally difficult thing. This is not normal. If they really want you to pass, I think you might be able to get some help.
Right. And you should. Because one of the things we didn't put on our list of how to decide if you need to take February was how much do you need to pass? Because that doesn't really get you very far if these other factors aren't lining up. So, if your job is insisting that you have to pass, then you need time off, you need some type of coach or tutoring, you need resources, whatever it is that you didn't get the first time in order to achieve that goal. And if you can't, then it's hard to see how that happens.
Yeah, it's so true. And I know in my younger days, one of the mistakes that I made in my life is I always felt like I had to be exactly on my timeline doing what I was supposed to do to move myself forward no matter what. And I, graduated in the bust of 2001 and all of that kind of stuff. We're right after 9/11, it felt like the world was kind of ending. Everybody was losing their jobs, but I was so panicked. I was like, well, I can't, do this because that's not furthering my goals, or I can't do this. And in hindsight, I should have probably just taken a beat and said the world's a little upside down right now. I can just do whatever I need to do to get through and it's going to be fine. And I just didn't have that wisdom. I was like a go-getter and just felt like I had to keep moving towards my goals. But, I think that one of the things that's important to remember is if you have that tendency too, it can be a time to take a breath and say, what will really happen if I wait a few more months to do this?
Right.
And what is the difference between getting results in May versus November? Because next year, they're not going to send out results in January, I hope. Next year should be more
ironically, they've actually already announced the date on which they plan to release results for the 5-area bar that hasn't happened yet. But they haven't given us a date for the one that has, which, maybe I have a little bit of frustration around that.
Well, I haven't paid those bar dues yet because I feel like they're not being put to good use. They're definitely not being put to use grading the bar, clearly.
Yeah, clearly. Anyway, that's a different topic. All right, well, let's get back on point before we wrap up. So for people who decide, okay, I feel like I have a good shot at February, I'm going to get my ducks in a row, I've got the time to do this, what should people really be focusing on that maybe they were not focusing on the first time around?
Okay, let's say it again for the people in the cheap seats who've never listened to the podcast. You have to do active practice and feedback. You absolutely have to invest your time, not passively reviewing outlines, but testing yourself and memorizing and applying to facts, and then screwing up and learning what you did wrong and do it again. It's like the worst type of studying because it makes you feel the crummiest, but we know from learning theory that it's going to get you where you need to be. And so spending time listening to lectures, no thanks. Thumbs down.
You don't have time.
Not going to happen.
It's faster to read.
It is faster to read. It is faster to drill. It is faster to test yourself. It is faster to go use a tool like our Brainy Bar Bank tool, pull out essays on certain topics, areas, test yourself using fact patterns, write out answers. That's where the magic is going to happen. And so if you do that sort of active learning, practicing under time conditions, really being honest with yourself about forcing yourself to try and recall information, you can get a lot of work done in a really short amount of time, but it is grueling. It is not fun.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think related to that is, we have a blog post that's popular on this, but you have to do the things that make you uncomfortable. And that means you personally uncomfortable, because this is where you are going to figure out, okay, this is where I can make up the most points. And this is ultimately just about points. This is just an exam. You need a certain amount of points. It has nothing else to say about anything. So, are there MBE topics that you're bad at? You have to study those first, because that is where you can make up more points.
Yeah. So for instance, I hate civil procedure. I hate it. I'm not very good at it. I've never really enjoyed it. I don't like it at all. And if I was studying for the MBE, I would have to study civil procedure first because I just don't like it. It's like taking your medicine before dinner.
Right. Because, you're probably getting a lower percentage of those questions right to start with, but that's good because that means you can do better on them. If you're already getting 80% of an MBE topic area, that's not a lot. You don't have a lot of room for improvement. 80% would be fantastic. If you're getting 30 or 40% in a topic area, you can make up points really fast if you just force yourself to sit down and learn that material and actually do practice questions.
Yeah. And for anyone that is really sitting out there listening and saying, you guys have not taken this exam in so long, you don't remember what it's like to try and cram this information. You guys, we write the materials. We have been working on new tools, just this week, to help our students study faster, more effectively. We have to use all the tools. And we're all talking about how we are forgetting things and how it's helping us remember certain things. And I'm failing a quiz. And then, this is what we do. Yeah, we struggle with the material so we can remind ourselves what it is like to struggle. But we have also validated through everyone on our team that has been participating in this project, who are all excellent test takers because we all do this for a living. We all said, wow, we got better when we did the stuff that made us feel really crummy.
Oh yeah. I used to be a Civ Pro TA. I like Civ Pro. I took a quiz that we had made for paper. I put it online. There was a Civ Pro quiz. I made the quiz. I literally made the questions. I read them. I filled in the blanks. I set the entire thing up. And then I took it and I missed a ton of them.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, okay. And then I took it again because I'm, validating the quiz and like changing things and whatever. And by the time I'd taken it 3 or 4 times, I was getting pretty good at it.
Yeah.
But that's the level of improvement you want to be seeing, is like, test yourself, see what you actually don't know, like have that moment of clarity of like, wow, that's actually not even the exact word for word standard for summary judgment. How can I not know that?
Right.
And then get it right.
Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, just, to torture me, Alison said, hey, I'll do the first round of the quizzes. I should have known it was going to be a Civ quiz.
It was alphabetical order. I just went with the first one.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And so when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is going to be fun. But even in my own disdain of civil procedure, I think I've took it multiple times too. And like, the next time you just do better. Yeah. I mean, we know this from learning theory.
This is how we learn.
This is how we learn. We learn better from mistakes and failures than we do from, stroking our egos that we're very good at something. But it's painful, but it's also like keeping yourself in the right mindset, but it is the heavy lifting. And so you've got to make sure you're in the right mental space to do that heavy lifting.
Right. You've got to keep yourself honest. It's like, all right, do you have overall writing problems? You probably need to get some help with that. You're not going to be able to necessarily correct these things by yourself. And I think, there are a lot of tools that, again, like if you're looking for efficiency, can help you improve your scores faster. And, just sitting and listening to lectures is not going to do that. You've got to do something different. So, if you haven't used something like Adapt-A-Bar, you should get that because it forces you to do problems, lots of questions. It shows you where you're doing well and not so well. And again, if you're getting those red flags of, hey, you know what? Like, you don't really know the Fourth Amendment stuff. Like, that was me. Got to sit down with that law. So if you have MBE issues, that's an option. Our practice of the week is a good option where we literally walk you through individual MBE questions and show you like, okay, this is what they're testing. This is the law. Like, here's how we read the answer choices. They're tools. And with the writing, like we've got the writing of the week. I mean, again, like we're walking you through individual essays and you're doing practice. And that is a really good way to spend your time. And it's going to force you to really encounter those things where you're maybe not so perfect. And that is where the magic happens.
Yep. It's just that life is not easy. You have to do the hard things. And studying for the bar may not be the hardest thing you've ever done in your life, but it is still hard. And so you have to just kind of get yourself in the mental state to use these tools that make it hard.
Well, and I think it's also about being strategic. Sometimes we talk to people and they tell me they failed like 3 or 4 times. And I ask them, well, how much practice have you done? Well, I didn't really do any. And it's like, okay, well, maybe there's a connection to the fact that you failed several times. Just putting that out there. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, like, of course there's a connection. Come on.
I know. It's so true. And you also have to be honest if you need additional help strategizing. This is one of the reasons we run a tutoring program. We think for a lot of people, you need to come up with customized solutions for you, whether it be, because you need to work on writing issues or multiple choice issues, or if you feel like the way that you've studied in the past haven't worked. I mean, we worked with a lot of students. If you took the number of students our entire team has helped, I can't even imagine what that
would be a lot.
number is with us and outside of working with us, as many of them have worked at schools. So I mean, we have seen a lot of people study for this test in some similar and different ways. And so having an expert on your team to help you decide how best to use your time, I think, is going to be critical when you have very little time. Some schools also do provide extra bar support, and you paid a lot of money to go to that school. So you should also find out what they're offering. Maybe they're doing graded feedback. Maybe they've got some special, programs for their students. I'm not really sure what your individual school might be doing, but you should ask. Because again, like you want to collect all the resources you have, and then you can always decide to fill in the gaps. Maybe you get a little essay support from your school, but no MBE support. So how are you going to go fill in those gaps and things like that?
Right. And I think, advocating for yourself and what you need, whether it's to yourself or to other people, is so critical in this scenario because time is so short that you've got to get the tools and resources that you need to give yourself a really good shot at passing, or this entire situation is just going to frankly be a waste of time and energy and money.
Yeah.
And we don't want that to happen.
No, I mean, we want you to be successful. we really do. That's why we spend a lot of time doing this. The other thing, though, I think that this is just the nitty gritty, is you're not going to have a lot of time to decide. So, one thing that I might recommend to folks, if they just got these results and like you've never done research on bar tutors or anything, you've got to sit down like the day after you get results. If you're listening to this as soon as you can, like you've got to start moving fast. These programs that are out there are going to fill up because if people are choosing to study, a lot of people are going to probably want help, but you just don't have a lot of time to waste like interviewing a bunch of different programs. You need to think about what you need and then see what you can learn about the different programs that are out there and then pick the right one for you and move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be really hard if you're one of those people who is a maximizer, not a satisficer, who wants to like really explore your options and think about it and dig into it. Because like you said, like people are going to fill up and you're just not going to have time. So, we don't want to disappoint people, but we're probably realistically going to have to turn people away.
Yeah. Yeah. And we do every year, but usually there's a much longer window.
Usually it's not like you need to decide by probably the end of today or tomorrow. It's like, oh yeah, you could decide in the next week or so. Like that's just not, I mean, a week or so is like you already lost, a huge percentage of your study time.
Yeah, exactly. So you're just going to have to try and make, quick decisions. And we're hoping that this podcast, the whole point of, recording this and getting this out there is we really wanted to help you think a little bit ahead so you can make these decisions quickly.
Right.
I guess my last piece of advice on that is if you do end up like interviewing tutors or talking to a bunch of different folks, I think you just really need to listen to your gut because this is going to be hard and it is going to be challenging. And you just want to make sure that you feel that the philosophy of whatever program you're signing up for jives with you. It feels good to you. You think it's going to be a good match because it's going to be intense and you just want the people on your team that you're going to feel good about having on your team.
Right. I think a lot of this is going to come down to trust. Whoever it is that's on your side, you've got to trust that person because they're kind of what's going to pull you along. And obviously you have to do the work and commit to it and trust yourself too. But there's not a lot of time for like second guessing what you're being asked to do, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think we're running out of time, but I think we wanted to talk about one more thing, which I'm sure is going to be heavily discussed in the next few weeks, which is how much can we game what's going to be on the February exam, and should we only study what we think might be on the test?
I mean, I think this is always a hard question. I think you have to be realistic about what you can learn and not learn. I mean, I don't want to tell someone like only study, topic X because I guarantee that's going to be on there. But that being said, there are certain things that probably will show up. You will almost certainly have a professional responsibility question. So that should be at the top of your study list. There are things that, I mean, it's always tricky. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this?
So, we like data. We're kind of data geeks. And so I always feel good about relying on data and what is most heavily tested. Rather than what could likely show up. Because every now and then, you have all these predictions and all this stuff, and then sometimes they're completely wrong.
Right,
and
like the dormant commerce clause makes an appearance. And everyone's like,
right.
Whoa, okay.
Whoa, or they told me remedies is never going to be on your test, and it was like totally on my test. So I'm not a gambling person by nature, and so I don't like to gamble. So I like to hedge my bets. So I believe that, there's some stuff we can be almost positive will show up in California. Professional responsibility, now I would put money on that. The 7 MBE topics, well, if you're taking the MBE, they will also be on your test. For the other stuff, you can just look at what's most heavily tested. Wills and trusts of community property, very, very heavily tested. But even with all the other subjects, using tools like our Brainy Bar Bank tool, and we have frequency charts that we look at, you can see what is most likely in each topic to show up. So you just want to make sure you know all of that stuff.
Right. I think that's
all of it.
I think that's the better approach is within a topic. Assume you're going to study all the topics, but within a topic, what do you need to focus on? If you can't do a hearsay analysis and you get an evidence question, like that's going to be problematic.
Yeah.
But like, do you necessarily need to remember like every single crazy detail about every single possible exception to the exception in every topic? That's not feasible right now.
No, it's not. And that's not necessary because this is a minimum competency knowledge of the law test. So You don't have to know every single nuance to every single nuance. And if you're in crunch time, it would, do a disservice for you to spend 45 minutes trying to learn a nuance instead of 45 minutes trying to learn something that's heavily tested. This is one of the reasons we like the SMART bar prep outlines, because he highlights in the outline what is most heavily tested. Right. So you can just from the outline say, I got to know this stuff. And maybe this other stuff is a nice to know. I'll come back to it later.
Yeah, I mean, you skim through it. You don't try to memorize it. But then there's certain things that you need to basically be able to write out almost word for word. If it's a SMART bar prep and it's red on the outline, you probably ought to be able to really write those rules down.
Yep.
The yellow ones, probably not so much. You're not going to memorize those word for word, but you might identify the issue if it shows up and get kind of close.
Yep. Well, I know that we are about out of time. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with people?
No, I think my main consideration would really just be like making a decision one way or the other as rapidly as possible and moving forward based on that decision, and then not second guessing yourself, because if you are doing February, there's no time to be second guessing. And if you decide to postpone, then don't waste your time and energy thinking about whether you should have been taking this other test because you're not taking it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think for me, the only other thing I would add is just there's so much emotion wrapped up in this, the state of the world plus the bar exam in general, to really give yourself some time to take some breaths, take a walk, try and really sit with some of the realities and the decisions that you're making. And although you are under time pressure to pick a direction, just make sure that you can do what you can to not just be reactionary, but just be methodical, go through our questions. This transcript will be on our website. You can just print out kind of what we've talked about and ask yourself each of these questions and just be methodical. And I think that the answer of what to do is going to, become clearer if you can just, calm your nervous system a little bit and just be methodical and see what your options are.
Right. And I think be objective, so really, for me, it just really comes down bottom line to how close are you to passing the first time around and how much time do you have to prepare? Those are my two big takeaways.
Yeah. And hang in there because it's a wild ride either way.
It's going to be a wild ride regardless. So.
Yep. Well, with that, we are out of time, and we're thinking about you, California bar takers, because boy, this was a doozy. So we are thinking about you.
Such a crazy situation, but you will get through it one way or the other.
You will. So before we wrap up, I want to take a second to remind you to check out our blog at barexamtoolbox.com, which is full of helpful tips to help you prepare and stay sane as you study for the bar exam. You can also find information on our website about our courses, tools, and one-on-one tutoring programs to support you as you study for the UBE or very quickly for the California bar exam. If you enjoyed this episode of the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you're still in law school, you might also like to check out our popular Law School Toolbox podcast as well. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Allison at lee@barexamtoolbox.com or allison@barexamtoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at barexamtoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.